need this set up at home. I feel so affirmed when the sparks fly up, the band plays. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. This is like my favorite state. I married a woman from Michigan 32 years ago. You're married to a woman from Michigan too. Yeah! Those of you who've married women from Michigan know, highly recommended. And so I have been in and out of this state, well, for 40 years, the 40 years I've been with her. And it's just wonderful. I always gain several pounds. I eat too much. I eat like an animal in Michigan for some reason. But I love it. It's beautiful. The people are kind. It's one of the coolest states to drive around. Wherever you stop, people are nice to you. It's sort of like my house. It's unbelievable. But every time I come here, I think to myself, who runs this place and who votes for them? No, I'm serious. I've never met, and it's not like I come to Michigan and hang around with people who share my political views. Most people I talk to in Michigan, we don't talk politics, ever. Mostly we talk fishing, which is excellent here, by the way. Ice fishing and open water fishing. But anyway, I don't think I've ever met anybody in the state of Michigan who would vote for Gretchen Whitmer. So, like, how did that happen? No, and I'm not making a partisan point. I'm just making a very kind of straightforward, non-political point. If you're running a state and people are leaving, then you are by definition failing. Or am I missing something? Is there another definition? If you run a restaurant and no one wants to eat there, maybe it's not a very good restaurant. It's not the food's fault, it's how you're preparing it, right? So how did that happen? And every time I come here, I ask the same question, like, who's voting for these people?
Harvesters.
This is a true story. Last summer, we were in suburban Detroit, where my wife grew up, staying with her aunt. And I went into Greektown to do my show. And everyone always, makes fun of Detroit, city of Detroit. And so I just asked every single person I met in Detroit. I was there for like 6 hours. Wanted out to get something to eat. Like, did you vote for Gretchen Whitmer? No. I mean, maybe they all did and wouldn't admit it. But it does raise the question, like, how does this happen? How do you take something great, with great people, great natural resources, great human resources, and make it so crummy that everyone wants to move to Fort Lauderdale? Huh? And it's interesting, I've been brooding about this all week. I landed yesterday from Argentina, which reminds me a lot of Michigan, in that it has everything going for it. It's a beautiful place with smart people, excellent food, and like Michigan, it has an outflow, a net outflow of people. Like, people are from there, they love it, but their kids have to leave because there's no opportunity there. And the answer is the same in Argentina and Michigan: terrible leadership. The people in charge are so incompetent that, and I'm not saying in Argentina they would prevent you from buying house paint to stop the spread of a virus. I mean, they're not that insane. Though you do get a tax break for being transgender. Literally in Argentina. In the same way that your governor wants to criminalize calling people by their correct gender. So there's the fundamental American woke academic craziness. But in some ways that's just a distraction from the core issue, which is, are you running things well? I mean, there are all the ideological debates we have, but in the end, if people can't make a living and there's no promise of a future for their children, then by definition you are a failure. And I think it's impossible to defend a record like that. You can't, I mean, there's no argument. You can, jump up and down and scream about trans rights, or you can, like your attorney general, who's truly a lunatic, by the way, truly a lunatic. You can just throw people in prison when they disagree with you, which he's in the process of doing, as you know. But in the end, you can't win the argument. No one's eating at your restaurant. Like, you are a failure. So how are you still there? Well, there's really only one way, and that's by capturing the system that puts people there. And the state of Michigan, I have no doubt, as there are in many blue states, there's a massive amount of fraud. There always is. Anyone who claims there isn't hasn't covered campaigns. I covered campaigns for over 20 years. Trust me, there's fraud. But I think the most insidious fraud is the kind that you see right in front of you, where public employees are paid to tip the scales in favor of the party that pays them with your tax dollars. That's fraud. That's illegitimate. That's not democracy. You can't pay unionized teachers to vote for you, but that's what they do. And I say this as someone who married a teacher from Michigan and who put 4 children through school. So, I don't have a lot of patience for the "you hate teachers." Oh, shut up. No, I like them enough that I married one. I don't hate teachers. I sent all my children to school. I shouldn't have, but I did. It was the law at the time. But it's not about whether or not you like teachers. It's about whether or not a government employee ought to be allowed to use tax dollars to campaign for the people who pay that employee. And that's completely illegitimate. That's totally third world. That's insane. If you have unionized teachers going door to door, campaigning in the 3-month vacation they get every year at your expense, you have by definition a corrupt system. So my question is, why doesn't someone do something about it? And I have to say of Republicans that I vote Republican by default, because I have no choice. And I'm not going to beat up on Republicans. Most people here probably vote Republican like me. But I will say an awful lot of time is spent complaining and maybe too little doing the 2 things you really need to do, and that's what I want to talk about today. And by the way, before I get into my remarks, let me say we're doing Q&A at the end, but please don't wait. Most speakers hate being yelled at while they talk, but I worked in cable news for so many years that I kind of enjoy it. So if you've got something hostile to say, just yell it. Throw a dinner roll or whatever, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Yeah, whatever you said, I affirm it. So look, here's the point. The 2 things you need to do are organize and speak with total honesty, clarity, and aggression. Those are the 2 things you need to do. Now, neither one of those things is easy. Complaining is easy. Watching television is easy. Eating with people you agree with and grousing is really easy. That's why those are the first things I do when I'm mad about something. I whine to my wife about it, or I lecture my dogs. All 4 of whom agree with me, by the way. I have the most right-wing spaniels in Maine. But none of those things change the outcome. You need to act, you need to speak, and you need to organize. And before you can do either one of those, you need to recognize the consequences, the stakes. It's not just about people doing things you disagree with. It's about the most fundamental question of all, which is, can you have children? Will they live in a world where they can afford to get married themselves and have children? And will those children live where you lived? Will they live within driving distance of your grave? Will the civilization that produced you continue? These are, I hate the word, but these are literally existential questions. Will the world that produced you continue to exist? And the answer is no. With bad leadership, it won't. Everything is at stake. And that's not a fundraising pitch. It's not one of those direct mail things you get, send us $20 or your grandchildren will die. It's the truth. It's the truth. If people in Michigan feel like they can't live here, then the odds are your children and grandchildren won't. And the life that you've so enjoyed and that you've made possible for them, working every day, will not continue. And you'll do what Americans for the last couple of generations have done. You'll just leave. You'll run away. You'll go to Florida. You'll move somewhere else. We got to move out of Detroit. It blows up in 1967, and like half the people who live there are like, that's it. We're moving to Macomb and Oakland counties. Which, again, I'm not judging at all. I mean, of course, I'm married to someone whose family did that. And I'm sure half the people in this audience had family who did that. But at a certain point, you wonder, like, can you keep running away?
No.
And at a certain point, is there anywhere to go? And the answer is no. And why should you? They turned the world that you grew up in, that you love, that you contributed to, into something you don't recognize, and you're like, all right, I'm out? Really? Doesn't seem very American to me. And by the way, at this point, you're kind of out of options anyway. Yeah, DeSantis is, I think, a very good governor of Florida. I'm there a lot. And so that's an obvious destination for people. But he barely won his first election against like a crackhead. No, I'm serious, a meth head. It was like a complete, not only lunatic, but fraud. He barely won. That was Florida. So I hope Florida stays reasonable forever. And I like to fish there, so I especially feel that way. But there's no guarantee it will. There's no guarantee that anything stays the same. And the only way to ensure that it does is to stay and fight for it with the knowledge that if you don't, you could lose it for real. I mean, it would be so interesting to know the number of people in this audience who had grandparents who lived in the city of Detroit in 1966. Right. Exactly. A third or half the crowd. And they don't live there now. Because they can't, because it's dangerous and it's dysfunctional. You can't use the schools. But if your grandparents are still alive, it'd be interesting to ask them, like, what was 8th grade like in a public school in Detroit? And they would say it was great. I went to Latin class every Wednesday. Really? You studied Latin in a public school in Detroit? Yes, we did. Detroit was one of the richest cities in the world. It helped build this country. And then in one summer, it disappeared. And it disappeared not simply because you had riots in the summer of '67 in Detroit, but because the productive people who lived there left. And that was a huge boon to Macomb and Oakland counties, but it completely destroyed the city of Detroit. Your grandparents built those brick buildings that are being reclaimed by the prairie right now. And as you drive through Detroit, and I always drive through Detroit, every time I visit my wife's family, I drive through Detroit, every single time. And every single time, I'm left with the exact same thought, which was, this is a magnificent place. This is an unbelievable city. This is fundamentally one of the prettiest places in America. The buildings are unbelievable. The abandoned buildings are unbelievable. And the beauty of Detroit, it's a little bit like Pompeii, because it happened in one day or 1 week, the riots of '67. I remember the first story I ever did, not to get sidetracked, but I did it in Detroit. There was a guy called Keith Butler who was on the city council, and I went to interview him in 1991. And his church was in a rough part of the city. Well, the whole city's rough, but the roughest part of the city. And I was driving in a cab to go interview him. And there was a building we drove by, and the second floor was an ad for Cool cigarettes, and it said 25 cents a pack. And that sign had been there since the summer of '67 when that store was burned and closed. It was like frozen in time. And so that's the beautiful thing about driving through Detroit as opposed to New York or Chicago, cities that have been torn down and rebuilt countless times. Detroit just stopped. So as you drive through that city, you can tell what it was like on the day it burned. And it was an incredible place. Incredible. And the people there just left. They just left. And I guess what I'm saying again is we're running out of cities to run from. You think you're going to be safe in your suburb? When HUD mandates density, when there's Section 8 in your neighborhood, which is coming, because you're not safe in your suburb, actually. You're not. And next will be the rural area. I live in a town of 100 people. Why do I do that? Because I got sick of living in a city. Because I'm a coward, I guess. I should have stayed. Everyone went insane with the BLM riots, and then COVID. And I said to my wife, and our kids were grown, I was like, we're out of here. We're moving to a town of 100 people where everyone open carries and there's no violent crime whatsoever. And yes, people do drink in the morning. That's true. The Congresswoman has raised her glass. But it's a humane and polite world. And I don't want to deal with the rage that we saw all around us in a big city. And I feel much happier, of course, driving around with my dogs in that town, but I also feel correctly like I ran away from something and I should have stayed and fought. I was in that city for 35 years. So I think these are the things that I think about just because of the weirdness of my own personal life, but I think that this will be obvious to everybody in America. There's literally no place to go. Where you are now is probably the best it's ever going to be. It could get a whole lot worse. And you need to do everything you can to prevent that. And if that means that your life is going to be more uncomfortable for the time being, or you face greater risks, Dana Nessel decides to send you to prison. Yep. All right, that's the price. It's a smaller price than your ancestors paid, that's for sure. So what do? Stay and fight. Well, what does that look like before Dana Nessel comes to throw you in prison? Well, it means, first of all, getting rid of Dana Nessel. And the lunatics like her. It does. Leadership matters. You can have a system that nobody actually supports except the people directly benefiting from it. This is the main thing I've learned in the past 5 years I'm 54, I've lived in this country my whole life, and because I, unlike everyone else in Washington, actually kind of believed in the basic premise of democracy, which is the majority rules. That's the most basic fact of democracy. The people run their own government. If you get a majority of people to vote for something, that's now the law. And that's totally untrue. You can put it in a ballot referendum, some judge will overturn it. Well, what about democracy? You can spend billions of dollars on a foreign policy theory that nobody actually supports. Doesn't matter. In the end, most governments are run by a small group of people for their own benefit without reference to what the majority wants. And I hate to believe that that's true in this country, but all the evidence suggests that it is. In fact, it's provable. You know how you prove it? Public opinion polling. Take a look at the latest Gallup poll. Pick a poll. What are the top 10 issues for people in the United States? And then compare those to the priorities of your leaders. So people are leaving Michigan because it's very hard to make a living here, and you're constantly hassled by a government that never stops growing and that is leeching off an economy that hasn't grown in decades, okay? That's the truth. Take a look at the priorities of the low IQ lunatic who's running your state, Gretchen Whitmer, who deserves zero respect, no respect. Her priorities are what? Putting you in jail if you, quote, misgender somebody? What percentage of the population of the state of Michigan, even southeastern Michigan, is on board with that as a top concern? It's like roughly around 1/10%, okay, in that range. The things that people care about, Gretchen Whitmer couldn't care less about. Because democracy isn't functioning. If democracy was functioning in America, in Michigan, in California, the District of Columbia where I live, the state of Maine, the state of Texas, how many Texans do you think are all on board with letting 7 million people cross into their state illegally? What percentage? Zero. I don't care what your race or national origin, nobody is for that. That's insane. Has the governor of Texas done anything meaningful to stop that? No. The Republican governor? He's got a National Guard. He's the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, and it's Texas, so they're all large. And they have double-stack magazines in their sidearms. You think they couldn't stop that in a week if they? Of course. Just assemble along the border. We're not doing this. No, he refuses to do that. He won't do it. And it's not like no one suggested. I've suggested to him 3 times, including in private at a cocktail party in Dallas last year. What are you doing, man? Don't you have a National Guard? Why don't you seal the border? Oh, it's very complicated. No, it's not. No, it's not. If someone's trying to break into my house, it's not complicated to repel the person. Do you have a firearm or don't you? Are you willing to defend your house and your children, or aren't you? Well, it's more complicated. Then really tell me how. Speak slowly so I can understand. It's not more complicated than that. It's more dishonest than that. You're lying to me. You don't want to do it because your donors don't want you to do it. It's that simple. Greg Abbott. Liar. Liar. And worse than liar, betrayer of your own people. That's what that is. I was polite at the cocktail party, so I didn't say any of that, but I fumed internally like an Episcopalian. I thought those things. But the point is, if you assume that just because everybody wants something, you're going to get it, think again, pal. It's very likely that, in fact, you won't get anything that you want. You will just pay for what a small group of other people want. That's the way it works. Boo! Boo is right. Boo is right. It's not just frustrating, it's a betrayal of the core promise of the country, which is the people rule. That's a criminal act. That is a criminal act. Let's just put this in context. It's not just like you have boutique, weird, right-wing views and that's how they want you to feel. Like, oh, you're an extremist. Really? I'm an extremist? I'm the one who let 7 million people into our country illegally, whose names we don't know? In the middle of a drug war? Yeah. I'm the one who's ignored over 100,000 fentanyl deaths every year for the past 5 years. I hate the show of hands thing, but ask yourself, do you know somebody who's died of an opioid OD in the last 5 years, and everybody in the stadium does. And yet, if you watch the news or listen to the repulsive imposters who run our country, it's never mentioned. Really. Over 100,000 American-born young people dead every year, and some of them are not drug addicts. It's not just like you remember as a kid, there's some junkie found in an alley with a hypodermic needle in the crook of his arm. And you're like, well, that's sad, but also, you're a junkie. No. These are 15-year-olds who buy a Percocet on Instagram and are poisoned because China is exporting the precursor chemicals for fentanyl into Mexico, or is shipped here directly by the drug cartels and put into pills that are not advertised as fentanyl. It's called poisoning. Poisoning the U.S. population, and not of the elderly. This is not COVID. These are the people who will continue our civilization. This is our future. These are young people. I mean, I know them, and I live in a pretty weird world. I mean, I've lived in rich person world I don't anymore, but I did. And there are people in my neighborhood whose kids died that way, who were poisoned to death. And nobody said anything about it. Multiply that times over 100,000 every year. Think that's a core concern? You think? If 100,000 people were dying on playground equipment every year, we'd have no more playgrounds.
Swimming pools.
I don't even get into the COVID thing. I know many people died of COVID. I never met one. I know a lot of people who got sick from the vaccine, but whatever. That's not allowed. Shut up. Okay. But the point is, huge things can happen. Huge things can happen right in front of you, right out in the open. It's not some crazy conspiracy that you have to get onto the dark web to learn more about it. It's your neighbor's boy just died. He's in 9th grade. He bought a Percocet and they found him dead when they woke him up for school. And nobody cares. And we know how it's happening. We're not guessing. And nobody cares. Oh, it's more complicated than that. No, it's not complicated. And what's not complicated is they are destroying the country, whether it's on purpose or not, is immaterial. It does not matter. They are doing it. And everyone passively sits back as if it's not happening. And if you continue to passively sit back as if it's not happening, what's going to happen? Will it decelerate or accelerate? Yeah, those of you who have served in prison know. First they cut in front of you in line, okay? It doesn't get better from there. Then they sell you for a pack of cigarettes. You gotta say, stop. You cannot treat me this way. This is not your country, it's mine. Period. So the two ways you do this are by organizing and speaking. And on the question of organizing is difficult. Some people have a brain for it, others don't. But the principle is not complex. You are stronger in a group. And this is exactly why the Biden administration has handed out 20 and 25-year prison sentences to people who didn't actually do anything in the last week on January 6th. Why? Because they were in some group that was probably at least half federal agents, but whatever. Yeah. The idea of people being organized, of coming together with a common purpose is terrifying. The left, I will say to their great credit, are masters of organizing. They are dutiful, they show up, they are disciplined, and they are willing to put aside their differences for the sake of achieving a common goal. They don't argue with each other in public, they just all say the same thing, they all vote for the same person, because they know their strength in numbers. Conservatives, on the other hand, are very focused on their family, their faith, their jobs. Politics comes at least fourth in their hierarchy of concerns. And they also have integrity and self-respect. So it's very hard to get a conservative person to repeat some talking point he doesn't actually believe at all. They won't just sit around and wait for whatever the new lie of the day is and then just repeat it with dead eyes on television. Liberals have no problem doing that because they know that's the path to power. But they're right, it is the path to power. Organizing is the path to power. So if I were trying to figure out what to do in Michigan, I'd go right to the problem, which is your teachers union. It's really simple. And it's hard for conservatives to do that because they're very easily intimidated by moral aggression. You see this in the gun debate time after time. So if someone comes to you and says, we're gonna hike up the crime rate to a point where you have a non-zero chance of getting murdered, but we're going to take away means of defending yourself, you'd be like, no, I don't think so. But that's not what they do. They say guns are bad, guns kill people, it's gun violence. Yeah, gun violence, okay. I live in a town with 100% gun ownership, and there's no violence. There's also 100% chainsaw ownership. And there are very few chainsaw-related crimes in my county. No, the object isn't committing the crime, a person is. But they'll get right in your face and say guns are the problem, and if you care about children, people who have no children will lecture you, who have many children, about the children. And rather than saying, I'm sorry, how many kids do you have, you barren freak? Get out of my face. No. Oh, the children. Well, I love children. I've got 4 of them. I want to help the children. It's like, you are speaking in bad faith. You want to control me. Leave. Don't be intimidated. And so on the question of organizing, if people who are against whether, and I don't even know what conservative means anymore, but if you're against what we're doing now, a system that does not serve people, that only hurts them, that makes them weaker, unhealthier, less reasonable, more dependent on the people in charge, that's the program. If you're against that, you need to organize. And if I were approaching Michigan, I would say, let's find a billionaire, and let's spend the money not on 30-second ads, we're gonna spend it destroying the teachers union in Michigan. It's really simple. It is disgusting that government employees get to rig the system in favor of the people who pay them. It's really that simple. And by the way, oh, bless you, son. Thank you. I don't know what you're saying, but I agree with you. Sorry, that's vodka. I am in Michigan. Woo! There's no reason that people who preside over a system that doesn't actually teach kids to read, if you are in any way connected to the Detroit public school system, you have no moral authority at all. None. Zero. And nobody says that. You see some political hack on television being like, I speak for all teachers. No, you don't. You speak for the Democratic Party, you're disgusting, and we're going to put you out of business. If I were paying for this, I would focus on the problem, which is organization. And that really is the answer to the first question I asked, which is how does a state full of really nice people, decent people, political and non-political, I'm including a ton of people who think they're Democrats in that, by the way. You still have blue-collar Democrats, even today in Michigan, I'm sure, somewhere. You know, former union guys or whatever who think it's 1978, who don't understand that the party they support has completely different priorities that are at odds with them, totally different values than they had when Walter Reuther was running it. It's a totally different system, but they haven't updated their files. They don't know that. So I would make the case to them that no, these people are criminals. What they're doing is totally immoral, and they should never be allowed to walk in public with their head held high. They should live in shame. So if you're, I remember thinking this, so I grew up in affluent, well-educated places, which are also not accidentally the most liberal places in the world right now. So when I go home to the town that I grew up in, or if I go to Georgetown in DC where I spent my childhood, people yell at me at the street, fascist, fascist. And if people yell at you enough, luckily I've got extremely high self-esteem, but let's say I didn't, but even me. I know who I am, I don't really care what you think of me, right? But even me, if people yell at you loudly enough, you can imagine you've done something wrong. You can get off balance. You can lose your heart. Whatever the life force is that gives you dignity, that causes you to stand up straight and speak clearly without shame, it can affect that. And I would say people who are against the atrocities that are taking place daily in our political system need to regain that. And to speak absolutely clearly and say no. And does that work? So that's the second question. Does it work to tell the truth without apology? How powerful are words, really? Very. Whoever said very is absolutely right. So without getting boring about it, but last this spring, I decided I had been grown up in this sort of ridiculous Christian faith that no longer really exists, called the Episcopal Church, which is basically just total Wicca now, just pure paganism. And so I spent my whole life in this, and I was like, I went to the schools and brought my kids to the schools and went to church on Sunday, and I was like, the one thing that we never talked about in church ever, I don't think, was the Bible. That was for like the snake handlers or whatever in the South who were reading the Bible. We didn't have that at all. We had a ton of cocktails, a lot of like, our social program, we're helping the homeless. Every year there'd be more homeless. My church would buy tents for the homeless, and then they'd triple in size. And you'd be like, I'm glad the homeless have tents, but now there are 3 times as many homeless. Are we really helping? Shut up. Anyway, so I spent all these years in this church before finally escaping with my life. And I thought, I've never read the Bible, so I should just read it and see what's in there. I'm not going to do a Bible study, I just want to read it. So I'm almost done. It's been amazingly interesting. But one of the things I notice in this book, especially in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is there are all these groups I've never heard of before. The Hittites and the Ammonites, then the big ones, the Assyrians still exist, the Babylonians still exist, but there are all these different groups. And they're not small groups. They were like in charge of the world, of the known world at the time. They had massive armies that rolled into cities and enslaved everybody. And then they disappeared. And there's no remnant. So I'm sitting there reading the Bible with my Wikipedia on the side, like, who are the Ammonites? Answer, no clue. We have no idea who a lot of these people were. No clue. And they were in charge of the known world. It wasn't that long ago. It was like 3,000 years ago. They ran everything, and now we're not even sure where they lived. And they had the most advanced weapon systems in the ancient world. And they're totally gone. And we can only guess as to their identity. You are one of them. You're an Assyrian. Yes! The Assyrians were no one to be trifled with. At all. Congratulations. You had fierce ancestors. So we don't have any physical evidence of even the existence of a lot of these groups, but what we do have is the description of them in words. And those words, that document, forms the basis of Western civilization. That is Western civilization, is the Bible. What is Western civilization? It's the Bible. That's what it is. I mean, I had no idea. I made it to 53 without knowing that. I think that information was hidden from me. But it tells you that the power of those words far exceeded the state-of-the-art military power of every civilization in history. They are gone, but the words remain. And the words continue to change people and to change the world. So what matters? What matters is telling the truth in words. It's not enough to think it. It's essential to articulate it, to say it out loud. And when you do that, remarkable things happen. And this is true even in your personal life. Certainly you've been in an argument with someone you love, and the person will say something good or bad, and everything will change. If you're in an argument with someone you love and you say something horrible, particularly if it's true about that person, that will affect your relationship for the rest of your life. You can't take those words back. If I get in a fight with my brother and I punch him in the face, may have happened, everybody sobers up and it's fine. But if I say something truly cruel about him that is true, our relationship will never recover. The words are more powerful than the actions. And that is exactly why they're trying to control your words. And that's exactly why the First Amendment precedes the Second. There is a reason in the order. It's not just that it's nice to say what you think, and that it's essential to human dignity to be able to express what you really believe, though that is true. You cannot be a full citizen if you can't say what you think. You are instead a slave. If you're not allowed to say what you think, you are not a citizen, you are a slave. It's that simple. And you don't need physical shackles because you have them in your head already. So that is all true. But that's not why they're trying to control what you say. They're trying to control what you say because they know that if you say it, nothing will ever be the same. And this is exactly why they hate Trump. And it's not an endorsement of Trump, but it's just interesting since I've I've watched the whole Trump saga, and I've had various feelings at various times. I've been incredibly frustrated by Trump, because honestly, who couldn't be? And then other times I've been totally inspired and excited. But the whole time I'm watching Trump, I'm thinking to myself, the core question which no one ever asks, which is, why do they hate him so much? And honestly, why do they hate Trump so much?
Because he speaks the truth.
It's the talking. It's the talking. It's not because Trump's program is so radical. Are you joking? If this were 1985, he'd be like a center-left liberal. It's not radical at all. That's fascism? Are you joking? No. No, it has nothing to do with what he does. It has everything to do with the fact that for whatever reason, his brain is not entirely controlled by the people in charge. And because he's not entirely controlled, well, first of all, it tells you that everybody else is entirely controlled. If, like, Trump is the one they hate the most, like, what did Trump do wrong? I mean, you can say, oh, well, geez, orange or whatever. Okay, fine. But, like, has he really committed a crime so severe that we should send him to prison for the rest of his life?
No.
That's insane. And half the Republicans in Washington, probably closer to about 95%, would be very psyched if he went to prison for the rest of his life. So, why is that? I'll tell you exactly why. I know, because I've watched this really carefully from Washington for his entire term, and then the subsequent 3 years. They hate Trump because they fear Trump. And they fear Trump not because of what he might do, but because what he might say. And at any moment, Trump might be autistic enough to tell the truth about what's actually happening. Whoa, what's that? I was in DC when this started, and Trump had the greatest line I've ever heard. And no one even noticed it except me, because I spent my life in Washington, but he was having some debate, and somebody said something about NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, post-war, to prevent the Soviets from invading Western Europe. And Trump goes, what's the point of NATO?
You're fired.
And I remember thinking, what a stupid question. What's the point of NATO? Everyone knows the point of NATO. Like, it's to prevent the Soviets from invading Germany. But I was like, but there are no more Soviets. That ended in 1991. So, like, what is the point of NATO? That's actually, then I was thinking to myself, because I had been living in DC, so I was, like, captured by the groupthink that does capture you if you live in a place long enough. I remember my wife, who grew up outside Detroit, being like, why would anyone buy a Japanese car? That's insane. You know, I mean, she just grew up here. To this day, she would never have a foreign car. Like, what? They can't really be better. You know, you're a product of the world you live in. So I'd never thought of, like, what's the point of NATO? And Trump said that, and I remember thinking, well, that's an entirely fair question. I'm sure there's a good answer. Anybody? No one can answer it. And instead, they attacked him like he was Hitler. And I remember thinking, like, why are you mad at him for asking what turns out to be a totally legitimate question? And maybe you've got a good answer. What is it? Oh, shut up! Oh, shut up. That's your answer? Really? And it was that kind of thing. And it was the fear that he might say one of 1,000 things that you're not allowed to say. Which is pretty much everything at this point. And by the way, I'll stop at this and take your hostile questions. But if you want to know, this is, and I'm being completely sincere, what's true, the true things are the things that you can't say. I cannot remember the last time someone in public life was prosecuted or even criticized for lying. If lying was a crime, I mean, your governor would be in Supermax for life. If being incompetent was a felony, she'd be on death row. Banning paint sales during COVID? It's unbelievable. But there's no penalty for lying, and there's no penalty for incompetence. So what do we penalize? Every society penalizes something. There's a death penalty offense in every society from the beginning of time. What's ours? It's telling the truth. If you tell the truth, the real truth, the no BS truth, like what's actually going on here, is this actually working? And no, it's not. Why isn't it working? If you were to be honest about that, you're done. So you have to ask yourself, like, what does it say about a society where the only penalty is for noting what's true? It says something pretty bad about that society. Do you want to live in a place where lying is mandatory? No! It's a third world country, as someone just said. Literally 2 days ago, I was in downtown Buenos Aires, and I said to somebody, the economy's completely collapsed, they have hyperinflation, and I said, what's the exchange rate on the peso, the Argentine peso, to the US dollar? And they're like, well, the government claims it's 350 pesos to the dollar, but actually it's over 700. I was like, so the government lies about what the value of its own currency is? Oh, absolutely. I was like, that's crazy. And by the way, to pay for lunch, it takes a stack of pesos the size of a cinder block. And you need a backpack just to buy a pack of cigarettes. It's unbelievable. But I was like, I can't believe the government lies about the value of its own currency. And I was like, oh, wait, sorry. I shouldn't be surprised. Because mine does too. And about everything else. So if you want to make that better, I'll stop with this. I think the only answer is to tell the truth calmly and slowly and fearlessly. Everybody knows what it is. They'll come at you. First they'll tell you you're hurting someone's feelings, you're mean. That's always the first. Then they're trying to appeal to your basic decency and then subvert it. No one wants to be mean. They did this during COVID. Well, you should take the shot. Well, what's in the shot? Shut up and take it. But I don't need the shot. I already had COVID. You know, I'm 26. I just ran a Ironman. Shut up and take the shot. Well, what if I don't want to? You're killing your grandparents. Okay. Okay, so that's the first thing they do. They accuse you of being mean. And the second thing they do is they call you insane. You're a conspiracy theorist. Really? If I were the sort of person who gloated, I would keep a list of all the times I personally have been called a conspiracy theorist or a wacko, and then compare them to the outcome 5 years later. They all turned out to be true. And I try to be a decent Protestant and not brag about myself, but like, the list is long! Very long. And then the third thing they do is just criminalize telling the truth. And you're seeing that now.
They silence you.
There are people who are going to jail for non-trivial lengths. By the way, anyone who's ever been to a jail knows, and there are a bunch of sheriffs here, and they know best of all, any time in jail is not trivial. Any time behind bars. A drunk driving offense for a night can change your life. You don't want to go to jail. Period. It's not a joke. And anyone who tells you, oh, he's going to Club Fed where they have volleyball, right? Taking away a person's freedom and locking him in a cage where he can't see the stars at night is short of killing him, maybe more than killing him, the gravest thing you can do to another human being. So no one should ever minimize the penalty of prison time or jail time. It's profound. It'll destroy you and your family. And they're sending people to prison for saying that the last election was rigged, which it was. So, oh, how can you say the last election was rigged? Well, when the country's largest law enforcement organization, the FBI, actively works on behalf of one political party, and when its largest intelligence gathering agency, the CIA, does the same, it's a little bit like what's happening in Michigan. When federal employees paid for by the tax dollars of everyone take an aggressive position on the side of one political party, you can't have a fair election because you're using public money to put your thumb on a scale on behalf of a partisan cause. It is totally immoral. And it's not free and fair. If our election took place in Bolivia, the 2020 presidential election took place in Bolivia, I can promise you the State Department would report back and say that was not a free and fair election. And Wikipedia would report it was a clouded election because there was fraud and interference, which there was. If some oligarch, some tech oligarch, spent nearly $500 million to control the mechanics of the Bolivian election in 2020, we would say it's not a legitimate election. But when Mark Zuckerberg does it in the United States, oh, he's just helping with COVID. Yeah, he's really afraid of COVID, I'm sure. Yeah. So for saying that out loud, people are going to prison. And of course, the whole point is to convince you not to say it out loud. So, don't let them. That's the only point. Don't let them. And if you keep telling the truth, some of you probably get indicted by Dana Nessel. Well, you're going to women's prison, a little better. But still prison. But it's worth it. Anyway, don't be intimidated. Your children's future depends on your bravery. Tell the truth. Yes, ma'am.
So if we hear you right, this is a civil matter. This is up to us. So say all of these people are the front line, the second line, and the third line in the Army.
We'll come up with
Will we have, are you telling us that because we won't have a general behind us pushing that Army? Because I think we're all willing to be the front line, the second line. We know what happens to those three lines.
Yes.
They get annihilated. Will we have a general behind us that's pushing that first line, second line, and third line across?
It's a great question. I'm just going to repeat the general outline for those who didn't hear it, which was, if you take a stand like that, will there be someone with power to back you up? And you used a military analogy, and you said, if I'm running face first on the barbed wire and letting others run over my back, which is effectively what the people who Dana Nessel's trying to send to prison have done, will there be anyone to help me? Where are the generals? And the truth is, this is the inverse of a functioning military force, of a functioning army, where the generals lead. In fact, in our own military.
Do you think we'll have a general?
No. The generals follow in our current system. We have no leadership. That's the point. And if there was leadership, we wouldn't be here in the first place.
Amen.
And so I'm sorry to say that. But since I know a lot of the people personally who are the generals, I can tell you it really is like Bolivia. They're sitting back there with a chest full of medals and they've never heard the crack of gunfire. I mean, they're cowards.
Yep.
They're followers. It's just true. And you know that that's true. And when you're frustrated by the leaders of the movement, whether it's a TV network or some senator, you're frustrated because they're not leading. That's why you're frustrated. And you know they're cowards. And you know, I mean, I think it's probably an overstatement to say they're secretly working for the other side. Some of them are. But it's not that they're secretly working for the other side, it's they're afraid to stand up to the other side. They're afraid, they're cowards. Now, that's very distressing, but the good news is because they are cowards and because they are followers, how do followers get in positions of leadership? I don't even understand that. But because they are followers, they will follow a popular movement. That's the truth. If they see something happening, and the media will, of course, you'll become Nazis. I'm just letting you know that, okay? And if you're a normal person, I've lived this, so it's like the first time someone calls you a Nazi, you're like, what? I hate the Nazis. What are you even talking? Like, it's disgusting to be called a name like that. It's very upsetting. And the trick is just to remind yourself, I know who I am. I'm not motivated by hate. I'm motivated by love of country and love of my family. You're not going to define me. I'll define myself. Thank you very much. And in my own life, it's like, is my wife proud of what I'm doing? If she is, she's a lot better person than Kamala Harris. So, like, up here's Kamala Harris. I don't care what you think of me. I'm from here. I was born in this country. I'm going to die in this country. I'm not going to be bullied by you because you're calling me naughty names. It has no power over me at all. And I think if you go into it with that posture, people will follow you, including leaders. Last thing I'll say, what's the core prerequisite for leadership? And it's bravery. It's bravery. That once was true in the military. And it's certainly true historically in the military. I mean, King David fought the battles. And so, by the way, did European armies during the medieval period. King Harold was killed in 1066. Like the English leader was killed by the French. He got an arrow through the eye. What was the king doing in a battle zone? Because he was leading the army. That's what he was doing. Because you couldn't be king unless you were brave enough to risk your life. That was a prerequisite for leadership, bravery. You hadn't earned it. You're some sort of soft-handed coward? Well, then you can't be in charge. Go to the soft-handed coward section. But you have no authority over me. So people, and the reason the system was designed like that is because human nature is designed like that. People will follow the brave. They will not follow the weak. Period. And dogs are this way. Dogs are this way. If you can't convince your dog to to do what you want, either the dog is brain damaged, unlikely, or the dog doesn't take you seriously. The dog knows who means it. It's not a matter of being mean to your dog, but it's like I have so many dogs that I see this every day. And I'll have a dog, will kind of give me the little doggy finger, and I'll be like, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't do that here. Okay, excuse me. And people are exactly the same way. If you're afraid, if you're tentative, people can smell it on you. You don't need to make the case. They can smell it. It's an aroma. Fear is a smell. You ever been in turbulence on a plane and you get off, you're like, ooh, I stink. What's that smell? It's fear. And people can perceive that. And so if there's a group of brave, reasonable people whose demands are rooted in the American Constitution and American history and the basic expectations of people everywhere, which is for safety, no chaos, honesty, and a decent future for their kids. Those are not crazy demands, those are basic human demands. Our fake leaders will follow you. Yes, ma'am.
I really love voice. I am a media contributor.
Hang on, just a sec.
Oh. Thank you.
Wait for me.
Nope.
My name is Kristen Megan Kelly. I am both a media contributor and an exposure scientist, and I have a question because my colleague Tammy Clark and I were responding to East Palestine, Ohio, and you seem to be the only mainstream media individual who was covering the story with one of our plaintiffs, Courtney Miller. When the left is usually the tree huggers and the pro-environmentalists, why do you think it is that you were the only top figure covering what was happening in East Palestine, Ohio? I know we have regulatory capture, but I still cannot understand why the left and CNN and MSNBC have not covered this.
Well, because they hate the people who live there, that's why. And the only reason I was interested in it is because I live in a place that's so similar to East Palestine. Same kind of population, former industrial center. My time was never an industrial center, there were two mills. One made clothespins, the other made dowels for thread. So it was always kind of low-level, working-class manufacturing, but those went away in the 80s, and the people there have been either moving away or getting addicted to fentanyl ever since, and being unemployed and sad. So, I've lived it. I haven't lived that, I have seen it. I've lived around it on and off my whole life, and what's amazing is not that manufacturing died, but that nobody cared that it died, and nobody cared about the human wreckage left behind. And it enraged me. And you know exactly why they didn't care, because the demographic was wrong. That's just true. And I hate that. You either believe that all human lives are equal, not equal in their ability, but equal in their moral value, because God created us all, or you don't. That all lives matter. You either believe that or you don't. And I believe that. And they don't believe that. And they don't believe in God. They're atheists. True. They think they're God. And they can assign value to human life, but I don't believe that. I didn't create people. I didn't create the world. I just showed up here in 1969 and I'll be gone soon. So I'm not the author of life, and so I have to kind of respect what's clearly true, which is that all human life is equal in value. Period. It doesn't mean all human life is equal in computer programming. But it means when it really comes down to it, on our deathbeds, we're all the same. And they don't believe that. And it enrages me. And, people are like, well, you're just saying that because you're white. Right. First of all, I'm not from a working class white background. Like, I have less in common with the people of East Palestine on some cultural level than I have in common with some Princeton-educated black guy who lives next to me in D.C. I'm just being honest. It's not about sharing the same skin color. It's about sharing the same humanity.
Amen.
And the people in Washington, the people in charge of the West, don't think that way at all. They think that some population should be exalted and given special privileges and others should be allowed to die. And I think that's totally grotesque. I'm so offended by that, I can barely stand it. And I remember when someone came out and said during the summer of 2020, after George Floyd died, someone's like, well, all lives matter. And the guy was fired for it. And no politician stood up and said, I'm just telling you, in point of fact, as a factual matter, all lives matter. There was not one politician who had the huevos to say that. And I remember thinking, I don't even recognize this country. If that's a white supremacist sentiment, I mean, what are you even talking about? That's a Christian sentiment. It's a human sentiment.
Amen.
And they were allowed to take that position unchallenged, and the result is the fentanyl crisis, which again they ignore, East Palestine, which they ignore, and the general poverty and desperation of rural America. And if you don't believe that, get in the car and drive for 500 miles and see what your country looks like. I mean, again, I live there, so I see it every day. It's like they don't care. Well, their not caring disqualifies them from leadership and means that I will spend the rest of my life trying to shame, humiliate, and eject them from office. I mean that.
What's your name, please? Greg O'Neill. Tucker, thanks so much for being here today in the great state of Michigan. We deeply appreciate it. And let's thank the Rinke family for having you here today. Thank you, Kevin. Live Nation has played havoc on this event here today. They control 70% of the purse sales that take place for tickets. They control most of the media, and they control most of the venues. That's frightening to me when we want our freedom. What do you suggest we can do here to stop this? Do we go to Congress? Do we say, hey, wake up? It's very frightening what took place on trying to change this venue or not have it at all. So,
well, I agree with that, and I would just say, I mean, it's hard for me to comment on because it bears on me directly, but I would say I think this every day. Like, I think I'm the most moderate person I know. I'm not for revolution. I like this country. Again, I grew up here. And I just want to return to like 1987, the year I graduated high school. It was a great country. It had problems or whatever, but if that's considered extremism, this is not 1887, this is 1987. It was the other day. And if you think that living in 1987 America is some sort of Nazi hellscape, then you're the freaking extremist as far as I'm concerned, okay? So for them to suggest that I'm some sort of extremist reveals their extremism, just to make an obvious point. But I would say it's not just the ticket sales or the venue company, it's virtually every big publicly held company too. It's JP Morgan. Just shut down people's accounts or given details of people's financial transactions to the feds without telling them when no crime occurred, because they had unfashionable political opinions. You saw this after January 6th, turning over people's bank records and credit card statements to the feds. That's shocking to me. We should take down JP Morgan over that, in my opinion. It's Airbnb denying accommodation to people on the basis of their political beliefs. I thought we were against denying accommodation to people. Really? I thought we had a whole revolution over that, didn't we? No. It's all of these companies, but particularly the financial services companies. So that's scary. So like Bud Light, what makes, what training beer, you don't like it, don't drink it. Good. I'm glad. I'm happy to see Bud Light suffer.
Me too.
But beer, and I know this could be shocking in Michigan, but I'm just being honest, beer is not essential to life, okay? But food, shelter, they're essential to life. So if, I'm totally kidding, beer is essential to life, I totally agree. Bud Light though, not. But if you start tampering with the things that people really need, or making access to them contingent on reading some dishonest left-wing script, which is what they're doing, then you're a totalitarian country at that point. And I don't understand, debanking somebody is fascism, flat out. And so I'm not really sure what you do. I mean, I'll just say this. That kind of behavior is so truly extreme. It's so intolerant and it's so intolerable that if they don't knock it off, you may have violence in our country. You can't keep behaving that way. And so in the interest of preventing some sort of violent national schism, because if people can't live in a country unless they pretend that men can become women, for example, which they can, because it's detectable at the DNA level, sorry to plunge into science class here, but if you have to tell lies that stupid in order to stay in an Airbnb or have an account at JP Morgan, then we're gonna have conflict in this country. So I would just hope that lawmakers would do something about it, not simply to respond to conservatives who are being marginalized, but to keep us from civil war. We got to pull back from this stuff. Congress needs to say, I'm sorry, there are ways that we can hurt you, Airbnb or JP Morgan. In the case of JP Morgan, a lot of ways. And we will. And we're gonna hurt you unless you stop doing that. You have to have a country where people's political beliefs don't determine whether they can stay indoors or eat food. Okay, because that's just North Korea. And I understand, Jamie Dimon, that you're not doing this because you're mean, you're doing it because you're under pressure to do it. But you can't. You have to hold the line. That everyone should have access to a bank account, even if they voted for Donald Trump. Like, that's okay. And don't get down this road. But we're going to need Congress to. There's literally nothing we can do about it. Because it's not just one company, it's most companies. It's going to need congressional action. And by the way, they are afraid of lawmakers. Unfortunately, the lawmakers are dependent on them, and that's why we have no reform. That's why Facebook is allowed to rig an election, and Google is allowed to rig an election, which they did, and no one does anything because the tech lobby in DC spends so much money on both parties that no one will stand up to them. But that has to change, or else things could get super crazy, I think.
Tucker, we're over here. Your name? My name is Alec Beaton. I'm 21 years old, and I first want to start off by thanking Eric Castiglia and the Brigham Michigan Foundation PAC for giving me the Anthony Castiglia Scholarship. So my question for you, Tucker, is you talked about organizing groups of people and how Detroit has been lost in the prairie. Every year, 16 million Christians, 100,000 fishermen, and 50,000 hunters don't vote every year. But if they did, they would vote right-wing. On top of that, I want to ask you, how should Republicans capsulate this voting base? And do you agree that we should stop wasting time trying to retake cities like Detroit, which will never vote red, which demographics prove?
I didn't fully comprehend the last part of your question, but I think we should focus on gettable votes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I
Right.
think.
I mean, the Christian thing is, I don't want to be lectury or preachy or whatever. I've already admitted I was an Episcopalian, so I have no grounds for lecturing anyone on religion. But I'm very, very distressed by the state of the American Christian church and really disgusted by it, frankly disgusted by it. And the amount of collaboration between pastors in Protestant, I'm talking about Protestant, I'm Protestant, so I can only assess that. But the amount of collaboration between Protestant pastors and a government that hates them, explicitly hates Christians and Christianity, it couldn't be more obvious, is shocking to me. And the number of pastors who somehow decided the New Testament commanded their parishioners to take the COVID vaccine, you should resign. You should apologize for saying that, at the very least. And I just was shocked by that. I was completely, in fact, I haven't been to church since that happened. I was so mad. And so I'm very sympathetic to Christianity, as you can probably tell. And if I'm too mad to go to church, I think you've done something wrong. I think that's fair. And admitting, and I've done many things wrong in my life, but admitting it and repenting is not only the Christian message, but it's also essential for your own soul. And so they should admit that, and the insanity after George Floyd's death, where churches were getting up to say Black Lives Matter, which is an aggressively anti-Christian group, and Christian churches are promoting it. I don't think I've ever been that offended. So I don't know what to say other than Christians are part of the answer, are the answer. And I wouldn't even just say Christians. I would just say this: I divide the world into two groups: people who think they're God and people who know they're not. Yeah. And I'm a Christian, so I get kind of wound up about it. But I'm going to the Middle East tomorrow, and I'll just be totally blunt with you. I like religious people, and there are certainly parts of Islam that I'm still mad about 9/11 anniversaries tomorrow. But on the other hand, any people who have to pause 5 times a day to be reminded that they're not God, those aren't my enemies necessarily. It's true. I like people who know they're not God. It's the people who think they are God who are a danger to my family. Because when you think you're God, there's no limit on your behavior. When you know someone's watching, you behave very differently. And so it's the hubris of the neoliberal global leadership that scares the crap out of me. They're literally telling you they can change the weather. You can change the weather? Really? Bring water from that rock and I'll believe you. Oh, you can't? Shut up. Anyway, yes, I think the Republican Party in Washington has treated believing traditional Christians terribly. They have contempt for them. I think most Christians know that. But if you're running a functional political party, you would be totally open about it. And the only people I trust personally are in that category. I'm just telling you. So.
Here we go out here. Hey, Tucker. Whoa, that was loud. Hey, Tucker. Garris O'Donnell, leader of the Grassroots Army. I want to thank Eric and Kevin, and then for you for taking the time to come out here and tell the truth. But my question that I think a lot of us here want to know is, when are you running for president?
Well, thank you for your question. There's a lot of concern about security in politics. I mean, clearly the intensity is ramped up to the point where security is a real concern. But I know that in my case, with 3 daughters, I'd be assassinated immediately by them if I tried to do something like that. No, I mean, look, my gift, I've never been elected to anything. My gift is talking.
Yep.
My gift is talking, and in general, I don't trust people who stray from their lane. I've always felt that way. You know the famous joke, like, I'm a great actor, but what I really want to do is direct. Shut up and act. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was a talk show host. I've been a journalist my whole life, 32 years. I'm the son of a journalist. That's kind of what I do. I know being a journalist is like probably right above, asbestos manufacturer, child molester in the public view, but like the traditional view of journalism where you find out what's going on and you tell people. It's like not hard. It's not a profession, it's a trade. I like doing that. I'm pretty good at it. And at 54 to be like, well, actually what I really want to do is run a country. That might be an example of the kind of hubris that I despise. And I'll comment on it. I feel like that's my strength. But I have to say, if I could just stop it with this, but to make an obvious point, the caliber of politician has never been high. And there's some great ones. I have a few friends in politics who are like great people there for the right reason. That does exist for sure. But overall, the quality does seem to be in decline a little bit. And that's distressing because these are important jobs. Like, we make fun of Congress, what do you do all day? Well, I don't know. Appropriate trillions of dollars, chart the future of America. It does matter. We put a senile guy in as president. Like, literally, where we didn't. 81 million voters did. Who are they? Can we name them? 81 million votes. Okay. More than Barack Obama. All right. It's crazy the lies they tell. It's almost like the lies get more preposterous just to see if you'll believe them. Do you know what I mean? He got 81 million votes. No, he's really running the government.
The obituaries.
Tucker, you ready for another one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi Tucker, I'm Debbie Ringel, born and raised here in Utica. Both my great-grandfathers bought plats here many years ago, and they were part of the Hogs Hollow leadership. When I think about what you said in terms of holding your ground, don't leave, fight, I believe in that. My kids, I have 3 of them. The youngest is 23, went to university, got indoctrinated, and they keep saying to me, is this really the hill you want to die on, Mom? Hell yes. Hell yes. This is a hill I want to die on. I will fight against pornography in the schools. I will fight against all of this indoctrination. And what I want to know from you, Tucker, and thank you so much for your bravery in speaking truth to power, is as a Christian and knowing that what we're fighting against is those who believe they are a God. What are your words of encouragement to all of us? I don't need encouragement. I'm good. I'm strong. I will fight to my death on this. But to everybody else who's faltering and wavering, What is your encouragement to them?
Well, I mean, my words of encouragement would be similar to the encouragement that I receive daily, which is from other people. I mean, it's amazing how depressing it is, and really has been since Memorial Day of 2020. That, to me, that's when it started. When they started telling all these lies about George Floyd and then burned all the cities and then claimed they didn't, and then COVID happened. It's like, it's been true insanity since about May 30th, 2020. And hard for me to look at the news, but that's my job, so I have to. So I found myself wrestling with discouragement and rage, more rage than discouragement. And you don't want to be angry. You can't make wise decisions in anger. Anger's a sin. So avoid anger, but it's hard to avoid anger. So I have just been so struck as I've seen all these things happening that I find repulsive and dishonest, really just the lying at scale that's going on. I've been struck by all the wonderful and truly decent and kind people that have emerged in my life, almost as a counterbalance to that. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but like 10 years ago, how many truly deep conversations did you have about life and the world and death and the future of democracy with other people? Like, probably not too many. I feel like the country's gotten unhappier, but also deeper. I feel like people's relationships have become, I've lost 1 million friends because I'm now a fascist or whatever, but I've also gained so many friendships that are even more meaningful to me. I see that everywhere. And I don't think you need to be a believer to ask, like, is that natural, or is there some sort of supernatural element to that? And I think that's kind of most people's experience of life. Like, there's tragedy, but there's joy, and you get them in roughly equal measure, maybe a little bit more joy than tragedy, but that's just kind of the experience of living. And I have found that as my anguish over the country has increased, so has the joy and the wonder I feel in dealing with other people. And I think a lot of people have had that experience. I mean, I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day. I was like, I had this like such a deep conversation. And I'm like, would we have had this 5 years ago? No. So just don't be discouraged. Open your eyes to the beauty around us. And the last thing I'll say is, this is a very beautiful country physically. Just physically. And all of our conversation about the environment is about this absurd global warming. I'm trying not to use swear words on stage, but nonsense. That's what it is, whoever said that, yes. But no one ever talks about the beauty of the physical beauty of America. It's like ridiculous. You drive around Michigan, my wife's family has a place in northern Michigan. We fly into Detroit, drive up there to Macomb, Michigan. It's like by the end, I just have a grin on my face. And by the way, when we drive in Michigan, we only listen to Michigan artists, period. So it's 100% Motown and Bob Seger, right?
Kid Rock.
Et cetera, et cetera. Kid Rock. But by the time I get there, I'm like, I can't believe how pretty it is. And I think people spend so much time on their phones, captured by the screens in the rage machine, they never open their eyes. They're like, look at those trees right there. They're insane. What are they going to look like in 4 weeks when they turn?
Oh my God.
Awesome! Unbelievable! Anyway, whatever, I can go on forever. Last
got
question.
one last question.
Yes.
Your name, please?
Cherie DiDio. So my question is, and a patriot over here mentioned the citizens in Ohio and Palestine, and I have been digging deep a little bit into what the citizens of Lahaina, Maui have experienced, and just the plight of those people. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of talking about this in mainstream media, and my heart goes out to these people. Speaking of beautiful places, and I just wonder what your thoughts were on that and how we can get the word out. The people there are begging for people to know and understand what's happened there.
Yes, I agree. And if I'm just gonna be totally blunt with you, I can tell that you're upset about it, and I love that. Because we should, when we see Americans suffering, be really moved by it. And you hope that we haven't become so callous with the endless litany of tragedy that we don't really feel for people on a gut level. I've never been to East Palestine. I've never been to Maui. But you look at those pictures and you're like, man, these are my countrymen, and you're crushed by it. We should be crushed by it. I don't know. I don't know the answer. There are a lot of questions I have about that fire. But my most basic question is, how is this not dominating news coverage? I don't understand that. And it's scary to me that, the people who allocate the trillions every year and who are in charge of the defense budget or whatever are much more interested in what happens in Ukraine than they are in McAllen, Texas or Maui. And this sort of gets to my core concern about all of it. People are flawed, and human organizations are by definition flawed, and you're always going to have horrible things happen because, as noted, that's the nature of life. People get sick, we all die in the end. There's something inherently sad about life, I get it. None of us should expect an easy ride or a perfect outcome because we're not going to get it. But what we should expect is for someone to care. And I do think that really is part of Trump's power. And any politician like Trump, the one thing about Trump is people who don't have power can feel, and they're right, that Trump doesn't hate them. And that makes up for a lot. Because most people with power do hate you, actually. And they hate you because they're indifferent. I'm watching a really close friend go through a divorce right now, which is, everyone's here has seen it. Speaking of tragedy, there's almost nothing worse than that up close when you get, this is a very close friend, so I'm hearing all the details. And he said to me the other day, it's gotten to the point where we're not yelling at each other, we just don't care. And that's the end stage. That's true hate, when you don't care. It is. It's just, and that is kind of what a lot of suffering Americans are getting from their so-called leaders. Is they don't even care. It doesn't move them at all. It doesn't intersect with their priorities. And I think we're setting the stage for something really, really bad. Last thing I'll say is I would rather have a leader